JavaScript is the most popular programming language according to Stack Overflow developer surveys from the past few years. Every major tech companies have lots of JS developers and they are always looking for more professional developers. Because there are lots of developers out there, but most of them do not have any idea how things are working under the hood, and hence they fail these interviews. That's where this course comes in for you. It's not like any other JS course out there which will teach you how to manipulate the DOM and build some basic projects, but we are going to dive deep in the core JavaScript concepts by visualizing every line of code we are talking about with the proper diagrams, so that you have that mental model of JavaScript embedded in your brain by the end of this course. We'll understand the working of JavaScript engine, the different execution contexts, hoisting, scope chain, higher order functions, ifs, closures, asynchronous programming, and how the browser helps in this asynchronous programming, the HTTP request, and all that with the help of Fetch API as well. Then we'll go on and learn object-oriented programming both using the ES5 standard and ES6 standard. We'll learn how new and this keyword works under the hood, the function constructor, the prototype object, and the modern ES6 class structure. And we'll also learn about inheritance in JavaScript with the help of prototypal inheritance as well as the new modern way using extend and super keywords. It's my promise to you that after completing the course, you will be confident in your JavaScript skills like never before and be in the top 10% of JavaScript developers. You will be very comfortable learning frameworks like React, Angular, Vue, Express, and explore popular tech stacks like MeanStack, Mern, Jamstack, or any next popular stack in the market because you have that underlying knowledge. So are you ready to nail your next JavaScript interview? Don't be scared of those interviews anymore because this is JavaScript under the hood to teach you everything you need to know to get your dream job. Let's dive in. Hello everyone, with this video we are going to start our journey to understand JavaScript under the hood. But before we get into that, we need to understand two very important terms. The very easy terms to understand but important because we are going to use it again and again throughout the course. And those terms are the lexical environment and the execution context. Before we go directly into those terms, I would like to start off one thing with how JavaScript executes code or how we write code in the JavaScript. If you are coming from different programming languages like C++ and Java, you must have seen something like a main function with which you write the code which you need to start executing as soon as your program is started. But in the languages like JavaScript and Python, that's not the case. You just write the code in the outside of any other function or class or ifs which we all discuss in the coming lectures, but you just write that globally. Whatever the code that we need to start executing at startup, we just write globally and without any main function here. So that's the first thing. Now coming to the lexical environment. Lexical environment in simple terms just means where your code is sitting physically, like the global variable is sitting in the global scope. So where is it sitting? It's sitting in global scope. The welcome statements, this is sitting inside the greet user function. So its lexical environment is the environment around the greet user. That is just the basic stuff that you need to know for now. What are the meaning of those terms? So lexical environment, nothing but where the variable or any other thing is sitting. Like for greet user, it is sitting in the global space. This function is sitting in global space. It is not inside in any other function. Okay, same as the global variable 2, it's also sitting in the global space. Now the other term that we are concerned about here is the execution context. Execution context simply means what part of your code is currently executing. What part executing means, like if I am executing this part, then this is in different context, which is called global execution context. Execution context is mainly divided in two parts: functional execution context and global execution context. So if I'm running any code which is outside of any function, like this is not inside this function, then this is running in the global execution context. So execution context just simply means what part of the code is running. And if I'm executing this part of the code right here, then this means that I am running the code in the functional execution context. So this part of my code is currently running. That is the basic stuff that you need to know now. We'll go into detail of functional execution context, global execution context in the coming videos. So yeah, see you. So following our journey of the JavaScript, now we have to understand the two important terms, the global execution context and the window object. And the fun stuff is just along the way. Just need to ensure that we understand the basics. Alright. So the starting, I've just created this const folder and I have just two files, app.js and index.html. I did this because we can see the output of the code that we are executing here in the browser. Alright. The index file is just the plain index file, nothing much complicated here. And I have attached the app.js file here, and this is the app.js file for which the output of which we are interested to see in the browser. Alright. And here I will just open it with this, the live server. By the way, I'm using Visual Studio Code, and if it's not the case with you, then you can just open your index file here. Okay. So after that, now we can see the output of our app.js file finally, and we are just interested in that file. So as you can see, as we have learned, for execution context is just the environment in which environment the code is executing currently. So the global execution context is simply the code is executing in the global environment. It's nothing complicated, just a simple term. The code is just executing in the global environment. As we have seen in the previous video, that we do not have some kind of main function in JavaScript which executes the code or which starts the execution of the code. The global code just start executing as it is seen line by line in JavaScript. So any code which is not inside any function, like this code we have here, the welcome statement and the console log print statement, this is inside the function. So this is not a global code. This would not be executed. The code, the simple code that is outside of any function or outside of any object, which we will understand later, is executed first, which is why we see 2 here. The global variable was assigned value 2 and we just printed it. If we assign it 5, then we will see 5 here. That is nothing much complicated. Alright. Now what is this window object? The window of first, what is object? Object is nothing but a name value pair, not a player. If I write here window, let's say, okay, so this is the window object. This is the name and this is the value. Get params is the name, f of t is the value, and window object is the global object which contains all of these predefined features or whatever you want to say them, which is attached to it already. We didn't define it. It was the help with the browser and the JavaScript internally, and whatever we define in the global scope would be attached to this window variable. For example, if I show you here window.global variable, then you will see this is 5. Okay. Now you will see that if I do this directly, then also you will see 5. So you might ask, what is the use of the window object then? Well, what happens if I have the name, if I have a global variable, say 3 here, the same name is there of the variable, and now if I print the global variable, wait a second, global variable, and I will execute this function greet user so that we can see the output of this. So we see 3. We couldn't see, let's say, we didn't see the output 5. But if I were to do window or global variable, the output would be 5. So this is one simple basic use case. You might not do this, but just to show you what is the use of the window variable, this is something like that. Okay, the object we are going to discuss later. Furthermore, we'll get into details, but just for and this keyword, if some of you are wondering, we'll understand that also in the detail when we'll get deeper into the course part. Just for the basic understanding and that everything is clear for now, we have this the global execution context, and this is the window object. One thing that you can also see is the window, the greet user function is also attached to the window object, because this is also something sitting globally. See that the code is not executed, only the definition of the function is just attached to the greet user. The code will only be executed when we'll invoke it, and we'll get into much details of that again later. So yeah, that's it for this video guys. See you in the next video. Alright my friends, so as promised, the fun stuff is now around the corner, and we are going to see a real fun stuff in the JavaScript in this video. There is something called hoisting and code execution, which we'll understand in this video, and this is a pretty great concept to understand and to become a great JavaScript developer and to crack interviews at good companies, because what we are going to discuss in these videos can be a great interview question. Alright, so let's start with this. What do you think would be the output of this line of code? I want you to pause the video and just think for like 2 minutes and just see what could be the output of this line. Alright, so whatever you have thought, we are going to get into the much detail of it and understand how everything is going on. So let's see what is the output here. So what I get here is undefined, when you clearly can see that I have defined a greet, but in the very next line, not like this, I have not done this. So you might think that's why the reason that you see undefined, but you may also argue that we have not done something like this anywhere. Oh god. So what is that undefined, you may argue? And in other programming languages like C++ and Java, you should have seen that this would give you an error that you cannot access the variable before it is defined, but this is possible in the JavaScript. So what is going on here, you may ask? Okay, so this is one of the things. Let me undo all of this. Alright, so this was something that we had. Now imagine if I have something like this. I put it inside the function greet, and okay, wait, yeah. So what if I have something like this and I invoke the function here, like below where it, like above where it is actually defined? What do you think will be the output this time now? Alright, let's see. What is this? Wait. Okay, I had to invoke the function. I would say this greeting. Alright, and I will invoke the greeting function. Cool. So again we see undefined. That's true, because the greet is outside of this and it was not accessed. So undefined we can understand, but how would we able to execute this function before it was not even referenced? It was not allocated memory, if you think that. But this is not how things work under the hood in the JavaScript. There is a term called hoisting, which means that the variables and the functions in the JavaScript are hoisted, or you can say moved up to the memory space. It is not actually done literally in the code. It is not done like that. It is moved physically in the code, but it's just an idea to show you. which you will get clear understanding as we go along the video, so just have some patience. Alright, so what I was saying, that let me undo this, that the functions and the variables move above the code or just hoisted to the top of the code. This is something called hoisting in JavaScript. Now what happens is the code is executed, the execution context about which we were talking in the previous video runs the code in two phases. The first one is called the creation phase, and the second one is the phase in which the code is executed. So what happens in the creation phase of the execution context is this: it allocates memory for the variables and the functions. Let me show you this diagram for more understanding. Okay, so we have execution context, which is we have the code which runs, the output which we finally get is divided into two parts. The first is the creation phase and second is the execution phase in which the code is run. In the execution phase, memory space is set up initially. So in our original example where we didn't have this function, let me comment this, we had this, okay, console.log greet. But when in the execution phase, what happens is the JavaScript compiler will go to line by line and see if there is any function or any variable. It sees that there is a variable called greet. So what it would do is it will define it like this: greet equal to undefined in the memory space. It will not set greet to how are you, welcome, how are you. Alright, and similarly for function as well, it will see the greeting function here. Oh, what happened here? Okay, I will rewrite this only. It will see the greeting function and it will allocate memory space for the definition of the function. Definition of the function is nothing but whatever the code which is written inside of that function. So these two things are now in the memory space. Alright, now what happens is when the code is executed, whatever the code is going to be executed, it will take the reference. Wait a second, guys. Whatever the code is going to get executed, it will have the reference in this memory space, and it will also keep on changing this greeting definition or variable reference whenever they are changed line by line. What I meant is the greet was set to undefined initially, defined here in the creation phase, and now when the code is executing, now let's execute the code. When we move to this line, this is the definition of the function. This is not something which would be executed until and unless we will invoke the function. Alright, so this will not be executed right away. And now if I move to this line, the 7th line, the value of the greet is going to change by the JavaScript engine, and it will be changed from undefined to welcome, how are you. Okay, this will now be changed to welcome, how are you. So now if I execute the greeting and see the output again, you can see welcome, how are you, because the value of greet is changed. But if I invoke it before giving the value welcome, how are you to the greet, then you will see undefined. And why you see undefined is this is because this was set to undefined initially. So this has just relation with each other. And oh, what has happened? Yeah, okay. So okay, one more thing, the greeting def, how are we able to invoke it? So when in the execution phase, it sees this line greeting, it goes to the memory wherever the memory space for functions and variable, and it sees the memory, the definition of the function is there. Then it start executing the function, and when this greeting is executed, again the new execution phase is created, and again the same thing happened which was happened in the global. This was, we are executing global, we were in global execution context. So when it goes into the greeting, again the execution phase is created and then executed, which is called the functional execution context, which will get into the next videos, but that's just the idea of how the hoisting works. All right. Okay, so this was just a similar example, nothing complicated. I hope you get the good idea, and you must have generally seen that people, okay, hoisting will do it. I was seeing that hoisting will do it for, but it is good to define the variables above only to get rid of some errors. Some people also do it like this, where greet equal to how are you. They will do it deliberately. They will do it deliberately so that some people, the junior developers, can understand this, because not all of them will have the idea of hoisting. And this undefined error you must have seen many times. If you are a JavaScript developer, the value is undefined, this is undefined, that is undefined. Those all issues occur because the people do not have any idea about hoisting. But now I guess you have a clear understanding what hoisting is. And again, if you are not very clear right now, do not worry. By the end of this section, you will have a clear understanding of how the JavaScript engine works under the hood and how the things are executed, hoisted, everything. Because we are going to see many other things related to this in the next videos. But this is a general idea of hoisting. And I will also attach articles at the end of this section which you can go through for more understanding also. So that's it for this video. I will see you in the next one. Thanks. Alright my friends, in this video we are going to take a deeper look of the functional execution context, which simply means that what happens when we invoke the function and we go inside of that function. Until now we were discussing about only about the global execution context and how everything is working under that, but now we have a bit of idea of hoisting. We can take a deeper look in the functional execution context as well. So we have just have a basic function here and we are passing the first name and the last name to the function. Before we move on to that, I want to take a look at this diagram. I want you to take a look at this diagram. Here we have a global execution context, and whatever is in the white space, just consider it that everything is in global. Okay, so in the global execution context we have something called as global memory, and what is in the global memory is the function greeting which is attached to it, the first name and the last name. Alright, as we can see here, this is saved in the global memory and these two stuff as well. And now we are going to see what happens when we hit this line of code, when we invoke this function. Alright, for that we have to go into the new execution context, which is called a functional execution context. Alright, and everything which is going to happen with this is going to appear in this blue box. So for any execution context, memory of that execution context is very important. As we have just created the global execution context, we set up the global memory. So whenever new execution context is created called functional execution context, the memory is the first thing which is allocated. Remember, we have two phases in every execution context, the creation phase and the actual execution of the code. So this new execution context which was created, we are right now in the execution context, or we are right now in the creation phase. So as soon as we pass these two parameters, first name and last name, with the values John and Doe, the F name here, F name is associated with John and L name is associated with Doe. So these are also in the memory of this function. Alright, and the greet statement that you can see here, this, first of all, it will be undefined in the execution phase. So I can just make it undefined here also. It will be undefined initially, but later when the now we have completed with the creation phase. Now we are going to execute it. Alright, So when we execute this function, the first line that we hit is this line, greet statement, how are you doing today? So that value will be given to the greet statement just like it was before. Okay, so this value is given to the greet statement. Now we'll move to the next line, and here when we move to this line, we want f name, l name and greet statement. So where is it going to look for that? It's going to look in the memory of this function, f name, l name, and after that it is completed. So this function is completed and this will now be all removed from the memory, all popped off. This is something called call stack, which we are again going to look in the later videos of this module only, but now this complete thing is erased and we'll see this output in the console and we'll start executing again our remaining code from here. Okay, so this is one main thing which I want to highlight about the functional execution context, which is really important because to understand the deeper parts later, we need to have this clear picture how everything works. And again, if you are confused about the global execution context and how these all things are working, do not worry. After 2-3 videos maybe, we are going to take a look at the full example and we will understand each and everything with that example which we have discussed in the previous video. Alright my friends, whatever we have discussed in the previous videos is now going to come along and we will use all those terms again in this video. So if you were a bit confused about those terms, now you will get more clear understanding and why all the discussion was important. Alright, now let's take a look at the important and interesting features of JavaScript, which is call stack and the scope chain. The concept might sound fundamental, but it is important to understand when we are going to look at much deeper things. Alright, let's understand the scope chain and the call stack. So this is the very basic code that you see on my screen right now, greeting the John in English and the Spanish. Again, right now we are in the global execution context. As you know, execution context is divided in two parts, the creation phase and the code execution phase. In the creation phase, what happens is nothing much complicated. The greet in English, now this is going to attach to the global memory. Greet in Spanish, this is also attached to the global memory, and the first name John is also attached to the global memory, because these are the three things which will be allocated in memory. It's not going to be John right away, it's going to be undefined for sure before, but I'm assuming now we have started the code execution phase and we are into this line and we see first name John assigned. Okay, and now we are interested in this bit, what happens when the greet in English is called. Okay, before we go on to that, let's see what is the output we are getting. Output is very easy to guess and you must have guessed it right also, hello John and hola John. So when greet in English is called, it is, or I would rather say it is pushed onto the top of what is called a call stack. Call stack is nothing but it takes into the account what code is executing right now, which execution context is running. Okay, so when there is nothing running, we have the global execution context which is running. But as soon as we hit this line of code here, greet in English, the new execution context is created, which is the functional execution context greet in English. Again, now there will be two parts, the creation phase of the greet in English and the code execution. If we look at this function, we have nothing but a single line of code. So in the creation phase, nothing is going to be assigned in the memory. But now let's look at the interesting part, the code execution part. When we get to this line, it wants to print hello and the value of the first name. When at the start, first of all, it's going to look into inside of its memory. Does it find first name here? It do not. So now where it will go? That's where the idea of scope chain comes. It will now go to its outer reference or in the environment where it was defined. And if you see clearly where it was defined in the global memory. So it will go to the global space and look out for those variables because it did not find it inside its memory. If it was present here, first name equal to John, it would have printed it directly, but that was not the case. So now it will go out of its environment, that is called the outer environment. It will now go to its outer environment, which is the global environment, global memory, and it see first name John right away here. You can see this arrow here, greet in English is associated with first name John. Okay, so after that is printed, the code execution is completed. The execution context will now be popped off from the stack because it has done its work. Now what would happen is we again back to the global execution context, but in the global execution context now we see this line. So again the new execution context is created and it will pushed onto the top of the stack. Greet in Spanish is nothing different than the greet in English, and similar things will happen. It will take reference to here. Okay, it will take reference to John from here and print Hola John, as you see right here. This is Hola John. Okay, so greet in Spanish will again now popped off from the stack, and we will back to our global execution context. And if there is any code here, so after we have a bit of understanding of the scope chain, now let's take a look at different example. In this example I have not changed much of the things. I have just added this line here, first name equal to Jane, and just take a look at this var variable here also. Okay, so as per our understanding, let's try to figure out what's going to be the output here, or you can just take your time and see what's going on here first, and then we can take a look. So now I hope you got the idea after you have analyzed by yourself. So let's analyze together. So in the creation phase of the global execution context, we have greet in English, greet in Spanish, and first name John, just like the previous video. Now we are onto this line, greet in English, and the new execution context, the functional execution context will be pushed onto the top of the stack, right? And now it's again going through two parts, the creation and the execution. In the creation part, now we have this new variable that you have seen, this first name here. So it will be set to undefined in the creation phase as we have discussed, but it goes here, hello first name. As we know, first of all it looks into its own memory, and this time it's going to find first name undefined here, okay, due to the creation phase. All right, and that's what we have seen here as well, hello undefined, which was pretty obvious. Okay, so hello undefined is seen here. After that, the gene value is allocated to this variable, okay, and greet in English, it is popped off from the stack, as you can see. So this is one of the basic thing that you need to keep in mind, that when new execution context is created, and if the new variable is created something like this, then there will be new memory space allocated to that in its own memory first, and if it do not find it, then it will refer to its outer scope. All right, that was one of the thing. Okay, so now let's see one more interesting thing. What do you think would be the output if we invoke greet in Spanish here of this line? Would it be Hola John, Hola undefined, or Hola, I would say, G? What do you think would it be? Let's analyze again with our understanding. Okay, I will write one more line here, console.log completed English greeting, completed English greeting, and here I will say completed Spanish greeting. Okay, So we see the order also, and here I will just write completed greetings, let's say this. Okay, yeah, let's go. So greet in English is now coming again to our stack. Our beloved greet in function, English function, it's now pushed into the stack again. What do you think it's going to happen this time? We will go as per our understanding again. We will, this line in the creation phase, this memory space is going to be allocated, right? So this will be again like this. Now the code execution part of greet in English. This will be printed hello undefined because it was undefined. Value allocated Jane here. Now the interesting thing is the greet in Spanish. This will be pushed into the stack even before the greet in English is completed. Okay. So greet in Spanish is pushed onto the top of the stack. Now the new execution context is going to be created and ran. New execution context here, greet in Spanish. Memory, it will do not have any variable here, so it will not allocate any memory. It will not allocate any memory. No function is also there. So now what happens in the code execution part of greet in Spanish? Let's take a look. In the previous video I have told you that if it do not find it inside its memory, then it will go where it was defined. Okay, you should have to make it very clear in your mind that it will go look out for that variable in its scope. The scope is just the outer area which it is referencing. So it will go into that, down the chain of that scope where it was defined, not from where it is invoked. There is a difference between defined and invoked. This function is invoked in greet in English, but it is defined in the global memory. So where is it going to look for this first name? In the global memory or in greet in English? Let's see. It is defined in the global memory, greet in Spanish, and it is associated with first name John here. So it will look in the global memory and it will print hola John, then it will complete its Spanish greeting. This will now be popped off from the stack, alright, and we will move to this line, completed English greeting. Now this will be popped off from the stack as well, and then we'll move to this line, completed greetings, and this should be the order in our console as well. Hello undefined from that, then hello John, hello John. Okay, what? Wait a second. Oh yeah, hola John, right. Then completed Spanish greeting, completed English greetings, and completed greetings. So this was the idea that you should be very clear with. Alright. Now let's take a look at one more interesting thing again. What happens if I define this function inside here? And let's make this first name Jane on the top here, and this console statement I would say here. Okay, again we are on this line, greet in English. This will be pushed on the top of the stack. Alright, now in greet in English something interesting will happen in its creation phase. Okay, wait, before that, in the global creation phase we now only have greet in English. We do not have greet in Spanish. So we'll remove this from here. We will remove this arrow as well. There is no reference right now. Okay, greet in English do have the direct reference from first name John, by the way. In English is now on the top of the stack, right? First name Jane, it will be set to undefined in its creation phase. Okay, I'm not setting it to undefined again and again. And now we have function here as well. We have discussed that the variables and the function are pushed or in the creation phase allocated memory. So new memory is allocated for this as well in here in the greet in English. Earlier it was in the global, but now it is not in the global, and they two are associated with each other. greet in Spanish can reference this. Okay. Now let's move to the code execution part of the greet in English function, right? In the first line here, the Jane value will be assigned to the first name, okay? And then we'll move to, this is the memory allocation part, so it will be skipped. And now here we have the hello first name. Where is it going to look for the first name? Is it's going to look in its memory, so it will print hello Jane right here, okay? Now the interesting thing is greet in Spanish. This will now be pushed onto the top of the stack. Yeah, it's now pushed onto the stack. New execution context is going to be created for greet in Spanish. Here it is again. In this, we do not have any variable or function declarations inside of this. So what would happen? No memory is allocated, nothing in the memory of this function. Now let's go to the code execution part of this. Console.log Ola first name. Where console.log Ola first name. Where is it going to look for the first name now? That's the interesting part. Remember, I've told you it's going to look for the first name where it is defined. In that memory space it's going to define. So where is it defined? It is defined where is it sitting, or you can say, or the where is its lexical environment. It is inside this greet in English function. It's very easy to take a look at it and be very deterministic of your code. What will be the output? It is sitting inside the greet in English function. So the first name will be referred from there only, as you can see in this diagram. So you will see Ola Jane, not Ola John, because greet in Spanish does not exist in the global space. It cannot reference John directly from there, okay? Then we will move to this line, completed Spanish greeting. Then this greet in Spanish is going to be popped off from the stack. Then greet in English will be completed and this will be popped off from the stack. And the line, this line will be, okay, this line will be executed and code execution is completed. So I think that you must have a very good understanding of how each and everything works related to scope, hoisting and the scope chain. Alright, with that let's move on. Okay, so here was the output of that code also. Hello Jane, Ola Jane. Okay, hello Jane from here, Ola Jane from here, completed Spanish greeting, completed English greeting. That's right, my friends. Let's move on now. Welcome back, my friends. I know what you're thinking. We are way forward than the where keyword in the JavaScript, and we have the new keywords like let and const in the new versions of JavaScript. But why am I still using the where keyword everywhere in my code? Okay, so now let's move to the let, const and difference of them with the var keyword. Take a look at them, why let and const were introduced in each and everything. Alright, so before that, here is a brief overview of where keyword again. So when we define something like this, where greet in English hello John, then the where keyword gives us the ability to change it very easily. We can do something like this, hey John, okay, and we all know the output, right? So this is one important thing that can be done with the var keyword. Now there is one issue with the var keyword related to the scope. Okay, the var keyword is global or functional scope, means if it is defined here in the global window, like in the global execution context, greet in English is declared with the var keyword here, then it can be accessed anywhere, like in the greet function, or I have any nested function in the greet, I can access it anywhere. Okay, it is globally scoped. And if I declare any variable like greet in Spanish here with the var keyword in the greet function, then it is locally scoped, or I can say it is functionally scoped. So this greet in Spanish can be accessed anywhere inside this function. If there are any nested function in here in the greet function only, then I can access it as deep as I want. But just after this block, I cannot access it. Like if I try to access it here, we will see the error message. Here is the error message that we will see. But if I try to access it anywhere outside of this greet block, then we will see error. Okay, let me see the error. Yeah, here is the error. Greet in Spanish is not defined as expected because the var keyword is globally or functionally scoped. Alright, now let's see another problem with the var keyword. Okay, if I do something like this by mistake in my code, that I redeclare greet in English with the var keyword again by mistake, now this is going to cause bugs. This behavior is okay, we want this kind of behavior. But if I did something like this and I thought that I am defining the greet in English for the first time and not again and again, then this will cause bug because the var keyword allows us to do that and we do not want that behavior. Similarly, the var keyword is not block scoped. So if I do something like this and if I get into the if statement and I change it here again, hi John, then also it will be newly defined greet in English. Okay, here I can do it very easily. It will not cause any problem if I do it here. And this will be removed as soon as this function completes its execution. But if I do it here, all these are in the same scope, in the global scope, and with the var keyword I can just redeclare it again and again, and this is going to cause us problems. We do not want this behavior at all, and this is solved with the help of let keyword. Okay, so let's take a look at the let keyword first. I will remove this here. I will change all of them to let. Alright, now what happens with the let keyword is it is block scoped, which means that this block is nothing but any area between the two curly braces. Whenever I use two curly braces, then that is the block of this one. So let is block scoped. So if I do this, these three greet in English versions all are in global scope, but as we know, let is block scoped. Okay, so this let here is available globally and any function can use it. But as soon as we move here, this greet in English and this greet in English, it's different. Let's see how. If I do console.log here, greet in English, let's comment this function now first here, and let me comment this one here. Okay, we will see the difference. Console.log greet in English, and what do you think we will see now in this line of code? Hello John or hi John? Let's see. We see hello John here. Okay, not hi John. Now why is that? Because as I just told you, let is block scoped. As soon as this block is finished, I cannot access this variable outside of this block. So if I have something like greet in Spanish here and I would try to access it, this will also cause error. Okay, this hello John is from here. So the greet in Spanish also caused me the problem. Now what I want is, I wanted this kind of behavior, right? This is still working. Greet in English, I can change it. And this one also. we see the same output. So we get what we wanted to get with var, and also get rid of that problem which we were facing with the var keyword. Now there is one more difference between var and let in terms of hoisting. I'll write it here again for more clear understanding. Var abc hello, and now I will do console.log abc above this line. Then we will see what undefined, okay, because it's not available. I will see undefined here, alright. But what happens if I try to do this with let? What do you think we will see? Would we see undefined here? No, we will see abc. So in case of let keyword, hoisting works a bit differently. When it was var here, under the hood what happened is, this is what happened under the hood. Var abc was set to undefined by the JavaScript engine, and here it is set to abc hello, okay. But in case of let, similar things also happen. Similar thing is also happened, but it is not given the value undefined here, and that's why we couldn't see that value, and there was a problem and this error message here, unquote reference error, cannot access abc. Okay, so this was one main difference between the hoisting of var and let. Now let's come to the const. Const is similar to let, and the only one difference between let and const is that when we have to define something with const, we have to give it value just right here, like it is constant. It's not going to change at all. I cannot do something like this here with the const keyword. This will give us problem because initialization should be done right at the point. So this is one of the difference between let and const, and there is no other noticeable difference, or I would say there is no difference at all between let and const, but they both differ similarly with the var keyword. Alright, so let and const are block scoped, var is what we have said, global or functional scope. That is one thing that you have to keep in mind. Alright guys, that's it for this video now, and I hope you got clear understanding of var, let and const. If you would like to go through some reading material, I have attached after this lecture, which you will find easily. So I hope you go through it, and now we'll meet in the next section. Welcome back my friends. You did a great job by learning fundamental principles of JavaScript, and now you are ready to move ahead and understand different parts of JavaScript, like understanding functions, ifs, and in the next section closures, and a lot of fun stuff is just around the corner. We need to be patient with the fundamental part, and you did that very well. Alright, so with that said, let's move on. In this video we are going to take a look about the objects. We have a separate dedicated section, object-oriented JavaScript, for full understanding of objects and everything, but to move on with functions and everything, we need to have a basic understanding what objects are. So object is nothing but simply a name value pair, or you can say a collection of name value pair. It would be much easier if I show you it in real life. Like here I am creating an object user, and to create an object you just need to put everything in these curly braces. This is called object literal syntax. We will have different ways to create object in that section, but for now let's go ahead with this. So the first property that I'm going to add in this is the first name John and last name Tom. Alright, so name and the value, collection of name and value, that is an object. Objects can also contain another objects. For example, address. Oh, what happened? Address here can contain, this is a new object. Alright, so I can simply just write here city as San Francisco, and country I will just add US. Alright, so this is how we create object in JavaScript. Now what if I have to access this property first name and last name? I can just simply do this console.log user.first name, and similarly to add the, here I'm getting this address here. Now if I want to add city, I just need to add another console.log city. Now let's see the output. Yeah, the output is what we have expected, right? So this is one way to create object in JavaScript, and object is just nothing but simply a name value pair. We can also parse object to the functions just like we were doing to the strings and the numbers in the previous video, and you can just simply do this here user.first name, and let's invoke it here, create function with the passing the user. So yeah, again we see John here. Alright, so that's pretty much about objects which I wanted to cover in this video. So in this video we are going to take a look between the relationship of functions and object and what this line actually means here. Functions are objects. Alright, in the previous video I forgot to mention one thing, that we can also have value as a function to any property of the object. Like in this user object, for example, here func is a property and the value is actual function, and I can invoke it here by accessing it normally user.func. and now let's see what's the output. Output is hello world. Forget this error here, this is something different. Alright, so this in our case is called method. It's not a normal property, it's called method. If we have any property of the object have a value as a function, it is called method. Okay, with that being said, let's move on to this line here. What does this actually mean? Functions are objects. If we look into the plain English, then we can understand that functions are also a name value pair. Alright, we get that feeling, isn't it? Yes, exactly. That is true. Functions are objects. We can treat them as objects, and what that actually means is we can pass them to another functions, or we can just add properties to them, like we do that to the normal objects, like we did it to the greet user here. That's what it simply means. And that is something called as first class functions. When we use functions as objects, add properties to them and do everything just like objects with them, then it is called as first class functions. Alright, so here I have a greet function. I will remove this user object here and remove this line here as well. I have just a simple greet function here, and now as we have just understood that functions are objects, so I must be able to add any property here. Greet.first name, I will set it to John again. Greet.last name, I will set it to do, and greet.address. City is San Francisco and country. Okay, so here I have greet as a function and it's behaving as an object as well, and this is something which is very confusing, and some people cannot understand this, and it looks very confusing to them, that how is it even possible, especially if you are coming from different programming languages. But in case of JavaScript, this works, and you are going to appreciate it as well just in a bit. Functions are just simply object. Let's take a look at this diagram here. We have greet object, functions are objects, so greet is just an object here. It has a property value first name and the property value last name. It has another property address which is also an object, And now greet is also a function, so it has one special property called code property. It is not something like that you can access it like here as greet.code, not like that, but it is code property which helps us to run whatever is defined in this function, whatever we want to execute in this function. There is a code property associated with this greet object. Why? Because it's not just a simple object, it's a special object, it's also a function. So functions are nothing but special JavaScript objects. I can also say the word special here. Functions are special JavaScript objects which they have a new property associated with them called code property, with which we can access them. As I've told you earlier, we can pass functions normally to other functions as well. For example, here I have a welcome function which expects another function, and what is the job of this function is just to invoke that function. Alright, so I will invoke this function and in the global execution context, and now let's see what is the output that we get. Func is not defined. Okay, I have not passed the greet here. Now I did. And hello world. So what happened here is we passed greet function here. Remember, functions are objects. It was expecting that, and when it sees that there is two parentheses here, that is to invoke it, then it goes into that hidden property called code property and start executing the body of this function. Alright, so this is very important concept to understand for now, and this will build your understanding of the coming videos as well, and I promise it's going to be really fun if you understand this very clearly. And many people don't even know it. They are very confused about how is this even possible, but this is how JavaScript works, and you are going to appreciate it in coming videos. So now we understand that functions in JavaScript are first class functions, which means that we can pass them around to another functions, assign them to the variables, and use them just like the regular objects, because functions are just, remember, are special objects in JavaScript. We are ready to look into the two other important aspects of defining functions. And the first one is function statement right here, and the second one is the function expression. So what function statement is? Function statement is simply defining a function directly in any scope. Like here we are in the global scope and we are not assigning it to any variable or anything like this here. And the body of the function is sitting isolated in that scope. Okay, so that is what we call as function statement. Coming back to function expression, first, before let's understand what is expression. Expression is simply a line and something which results in some value. For example, if you see 1 plus 2, this would result into value 3. So it's an expression. Alright. So this is a function expression because when JavaScript hits this line of code here in the code execution phase, then this will be changed. Welcome will be assigned an object, a special object which has a hidden code property which we can invoke as we have discussed earlier. But until and unless that happens, this welcome is just another variable in the creation part, alright, as per our understanding of JavaScript. So that is function expression and function statement. Whenever this line of code is seen, it will convert it into a special object, and we can invoke that with like we do with the greet function as well, just like this. Alright. So in the fundamental principles of JavaScript section, we have seen that if we invoke greet here, it would work. If we do that here, it would again work, because after looking at under the hood, we saw that this is allocated memory in the creation phase of that particular execution context, right? But what do you think is going to happen if I try to invoke welcome here? What do you think would happen? So what we see here is welcome is not a function. Uncaught type error we got here. Alright. If you see here closely, this should not surprise you if you are following along the videos of the course, because as per our understanding of JavaScript, this line of code in the creation phase welcome is set to undefined for sure. Welcome is set to undefined in the creation phase, and as we have discussed earlier, it will only be assigned value when we hit this line of code here. So when we hit this line of code here, welcome is assigned with a special object, and that special object is nothing but a function and an object combo. So it would be this. Alright, welcome would be changed to a function when we hit this line of code. That's why we were not able to invoke this because of undefined error. But if I move it here, then this would work perfectly. Yeah, as we have seen, it would work perfectly. And if you're assuming why I have used var here and not let, let's see what would happen here if we would use let. This would work perfectly again. But what would happen here? Should we get different type of error? Yes, we get different type of errors because we cannot use welcome before initialization. So that's another use case of let and var, and we should use let to get rid of those bugs as well. Alright. So that is a basic difference between function statement and function expression. Now, as the functions in JavaScript are first class function, they give us power to do something more special, to pass them in another function. Like I am passing a function here and I'm going to invoke it here. So let's say I pass a greet function here, and let's see what is the output. Hello world, the greet function is invoked and the output of greet function can be seen clearly. Alright. But what if I don't want to pass this function by defining it externally? How can I do that? We can do that with the help of something called anonymous function. It just simply means creating a function on the fly. So I created this function on the fly and I passed it here in the func, and func is invoked on the fly. You may notice that I have not given it any name here. And yeah, that is something called as anonymous function. Because why should I give it a name? There is no need to give it a name because I am not using it like greet to invoke it outside. I am just using it to pass in this function. And when this functional execution context in the creation part, it will automatically associate it with the func. Alright my friends, this video we are going to start with a simple problem statement in front of us. We are given an array input in which we have 5 elements. We have to multiply each one of them with the value 5 and return the new output array. Very easy problem, straightforward problem. Alright, we all must have gone through this once in a programming journey for sure. If you're not familiar with what array is just simply a collection of items grouped together under one identifier. So here these 5 elements are grouped together in this identifier input so that we do not have to create new variables again and again for every new value. Alright, so let's tackle this. Let's see what we got here, guys. And we got what we have expected. Nothing much difficult, nothing complicated. Alright. Now let's assume that the problem statement is changed a little bit. And I ask you not to multiply the elements of the array by 5, but instead what you have to do is you have to add 5 in each of these elements. Now what do you think we are going to do here? Okay, you would say no problem, just copy this function and just make it output new array 2 and just add 5 here. Alright, you would say that would work perfectly fine and it's going to work as well. We can see it pretty easily. Yeah, 5 is added to each one of these elements, right? Now what would you see if I want you to divide all of these elements by? You would say we can create another new variable and just add a division symbol here, output new array, and we make it 3. And we get the expected result, isn't it? But don't you think this is making something wrong? Something wrong is going on here. Well, you must have heard of this principle in programming called DRY, which means do not repeat yourself. And what we are doing here, we are just repeating the same line of code again and again and again. Like for plus, for addition, subtraction, division, we are just creating new functions again and again. And if we have to create a simple calculator app like this, which could be done very shortly, if we could just have 4 operation, addition, subtraction, multiple, division, but I would have to create 4 different functions here. That's not the thing we want, right? Why would we want to create different functions just because this is changing here, addition, multiplication? Alright, so there must be a way that I can tell this function output new array. Okay, I have to multiply this, I have to subtract this, divide this. So you may think that I can just ask another flag here, and if flag is 1 I will multiply, flag is 2 I will subtract, I will divide. Okay, but what if our calculator app got famous and we have to add more features like powering up the function, calculating the log of the function, exponential of the function, and with that way our flags value will be like it can go on and on and on. So we need a more general and quite good solution for that. What we basically need here is what we are pushing here. We should have understanding what can we push here. Okay, isn't it? So I can just simply pass a function here and at this statement I just gonna execute it and that's gonna work for us, isn't it? Okay, let's try something like that. I'm going to remove all of this and I will create a new function, and that function what it would do, it would just multiply by let's say 2. Okay, and it's going to take the input num here and it's going to return num multiplied by 5, let's say, because we were doing 5. Why to make it a 2 all of a sudden, isn't it? Multiplied by 5. Now if I have to multiply by 5, I can just pass in another function here, which I will say, what can I say this function? I will say it func. Okay, and I will pass multiply by 5 here. Multiply by 5 is going to execute here, and now I'm going to give the value of our input array every time. And now let's see what is the output. The output that we are getting here is the same, but this time our code is profoundly more good and more readable. Alright, and now I can just use this function to do that. I do not have to copy this function. Instead, I can make small functions like this, add 5, that would simply add plus 5, and I can just pass it here. What happened? Okay, this should not be multiplied by 5, instead this should be func. Alright, yeah. Similarly, what I can do is I can just create a function to subtract 5 num minus 5. I can pass on this function and let's see the result, and the result is what we expected. So this way our code is now much more cleaner than what we were expecting it in the previous version, like creating a new function again and again. So this is one of the another benefit of what we call as first class functions in JavaScript. Alright, let's continue our discussion in the next video. So this idea of manipulating the array with the help of some function is quite common in JavaScript, and you must be familiar with the one function known as map function in arrays. If you are using JavaScript from some time, or you are even just starting using it, you must have seen something like this, that we define a numbers array and then we use the map function, or we can say the map method, clearly in the arrays, and just pass in the function that is going to work with this. And here I have just passed the function num into 10, so it will just multiply each of this number by 10. Okay, let me just print a new array and let's see what's the output. Yeah, the expected output we got. And this is similarly what this function, our own output new array function, is doing. So this feature is really powerful, and similarly the reduce and filter functions work as well. You can check them out online. And this is something like this is called higher order functions. A function which takes in a function and does something with it is a higher order function. Alright, and it will also be a higher order function if it returns some function, which we are going to see later. But yeah, the definition of higher order function is this: any function which takes in a function or returns a function is a higher order function. Alright, and now let's see what is callback. Callback is just simply a function which is passed into a function and it will be invoked later. Alright, it's just a simple meaning. Callback means it's going to be called later, not immediately, or it's just the second thing which will be called. Alright, callbacks are really essential part of asynchronous JavaScript, and we are going to take a look at that in that section as well, but that is the general idea. So here output new array is my higher order function, and whatever we are passing in this func is our callback function. So here sub 5 or add 5, multiply by 5, all these are our callback functions. Alright, so yeah, that's it for callbacks and higher order function. Let's move on. In this video, we are going to take a look at another ES6 plus feature, which is arrow functions. Until now, we are defining our functions like a traditional old way with the function statement or the function expression. Here I have the function which squares the input number, and there is easy way to define it and much shorter way, and which is much more preferred way nowadays. So how can we shorten this way to convert it into the arrow functions? Let's see. I can do something like this. I can replace this first of all with the function expression, and this function keyword is going to be replaced simply with the parentheses which come here. Alright, and this syntax right over here, there is only one difference. We just put the arrow here, and we no longer need the function keyword here. Like earlier when we were defining the function statement, we have to do something like this. But with the introduction of the arrow functions, we can just simply use them like this. Alright, so this is one way of defining the arrow functions, and it's just going to work like on any normal function that we have discussed and all the functional execution context, everything works pretty similar. All right, so no need to worry about that. There's also more ways to define the arrow functions, and here is another way. When we just returning something and there is not much body of the function, like in this case we are just squaring the number, or we are just multiplying the function, multiplying the input with some number, we can use a much shorter syntax like this. What this function does is just similar to this function and this function here, nothing much special, but it's a shorter and much more cleaner way to write it. All right, when we have only one parameter, then we can also just omit the parenthesis completely and give that parameter directly, like in this case. So this is a much more cleaner syntax than what we used to do here. All right, it's much more cleaner and much more profound and very readable and easy to use code, but we are not going to use it much in the course, because this, by writing the function this way, we get a much more deeper understanding and clear understanding of it, and it's easy to follow along and explain in the videos as well. All right, but you should always use this type of arrow functions in whatever the code that you are going to write, because it's much more preferred way to use in this JavaScript version after ES6. All right, this also gives us a power to pass it in the callback function much easily. Like earlier, I have to do this. To pass this, I have to define another function or create an anonymous function. Even then also, that's a bit long process, but with the help of this, I can just pass it, the arrow function, not like this by defining the function here. I can just pass my old arrow function like this. This is a much more cleaner way to pass this function than defining this function right here and then using it. So this is arrow functions, and it's a much more cleaner way to write.